I've got papers, Eva. I've got papers. I need to change. Look, I'm not sure that what I'll do is a summary of what was said. I heard the vibe out there. You know, I started back in government 10 years ago, and it's probably important to sum it up in terms of my own personal journey. Those of you that do know me know that I've lived my entire career around looking for flexibility, mainly to raise 2 children, and I found that the public service was the best place to try and do that. What I did realise coming back about 6, 7 years ago is that the last really good thing that we actually did was flexi time. And we were leaders in actually how we did that. What had happened for a whole lot of reasons, and you've seen the Microsoft example, that is fantastic. What has happened is productivity, the way people want to work, the private sector, you know, caught it, worked with it, and it was actually a productivity imperative. It is for the public service as well. And I know there's a lot of people in this room that actually would love to have those arrangements, and I know that it requires executive commitment and leadership from the top. And the reason why my personal story is important is that I came back to the public sector because I was working in the private sector where I couldn't get those arrangements at a very senior level. So the very first thing that I did was apply for a position at executive level on a job share. It was the very first executive job share in government. That wasn't because government was open to it, it was because I had actually a chief executive and a deputy chief executive at the time that actually said something like, "That sounds really interesting, what a hoot, why don't you give me an example of how it will work?" What happened was there were 2 very senior women, myself and my job share partner, that brought so much experience to the organisation. It actually started what I think was the first kind of indicator about how the public sector could look at itself in a different way. So some of the key themes that have come out today is that you actually need to look at the arrangements that these guys have talked about are absolutely critical. And I do remember Primary Industries Department having their work and life strategy. I remember having a PhD student doing some research. We surveyed a significant proportion of the public service. The one motivator for people was the ability to juggle or balance work and life. It wasn't just about children. It was actually about what they had in their particular lives happening and reconciling that with work. Your most productive workers were the ones that felt that they were able to do that. And I think I heard Kim and lots of others talk about trust. Trust in terms of where is my employee, I'm not seeing them for the day. Trust can't just happen by saying the word. You actually have to build trust. And that requires a whole lot of mechanisms in place, and we saw that from Eva in terms of how you talk to people about what they're achieving in terms of outcomes and not whether they're actually in at 8 and leaving at 5 or 5:30 and we give a big tick, or if their car's in the car park. So there is a lot to be challenged by in relation to this. It is complex in the public sector. I believe that it isn't just a story for women. It is about us opening up opportunities for the men that want to actually participate in caring, that should be participating. So when women increase that participation, they actually have the support outside to do it. Some of the other things that were talked about today, and Delphina's example of what happened in her organisation was because she was leading it and they found the tools and they supported people to do it. I challenge the groups here to either raise it with your leader, if you're a leader, make sure you do it in your own workplaces. Anne has described the sorts of tools that we actually have. I've actually issued a guideline. The challenge and the questions I think we need to ask the panel is, so what? So the guideline's out there. Are you getting a better uptake of flexible work arrangements? What's stopping us from actually doing that in our own organisations? They're the sorts of questions we need to ask ourselves and actually be really, really confronting around where there are limitations of this happening. We've also heard, I think, that a lot of digital platforms and our own literacy around how to use that is probably one of the biggest enablers. It is not the only one, and it is not an ageist issue. It is not that the young ones get it. I love that kind of reverse mentoring, by the way. But there is a lot that each of us can gain from it. And we could actually be seen as excluding a very significant part of the workforce by having some preconceived ideas about who gets the digital literacy and who doesn't. I challenge public servants to actually see what's in our name, public service. So the question for us, which I think is even more complex, is not whether we work in a particular place, it's what our citizens actually want from us and how we actually deliver that. So in fact, our question around how we work has to extend beyond what it is that we think we can do with our own work colleagues. And there are some fundamental things that I'm very passionate about, as you know, around collaboration and how we do things better. But ultimately, that has to be for how we serve the people of South Australia. So will our flexible work arrangements create that opportunity for better service for the people we serve? I say it will. So when we look at people, and I don't plan on retiring, so I don't actually talk about retirement, but what do we do with our workforces when they are ready in our heads at 65 or whatever? According to Anne, we've got to work to we're 70, because especially women, we don't have the super. What are we doing with those workforces? So flexible work arrangements is also about how you move your workforce through in different ways. So why couldn't we have a pool of people that basically never retire, that we have some different working conditions where they can actually come and, I don't know, sit on a services SA desk or help someone work through an issue at a hub at a council? Why couldn't we actually do that? Why do people have to leave the workforce? So I challenge us to think about it at a heightened level, and how can this actually help us to actually deliver things differently for the community of South Australia. The other issue, I think, is the guideline is there, so there is nothing stopping people in the public service using it. So I'd like for some questions around what you believe some of the barriers are, because it gives me a little bit more insight into what we need to do next. And I guess as Commissioner, I like the idea of actually issuing determinations, but quite frankly, if we don't deal with the culture, if we don't deal with examples of where this is working, it's not worth the paper it's written on. And what we do is give ourselves a tick that we've got a really great policy. And I think government's got to move from that to something else. So I applaud Microsoft, and I absolutely applaud Delphina and Anne for picking up on the really good work that many people are doing here, but we have only just begun, and it's great working with Kim. That 16th floor is going to be terrific, but unless we get people collaborating, talking to each other, it won't be successful. It'd just be a bunch of people working on a floor together. So culture needs to be a very significant part of how you make an open, flexible workforce work together. And the key is collaboration, and if you allow it to work, your innovation happens from there. No one innovates on their own. Thank you.